Sure, gas prices are the highest ever. But is this the worst thing, truly the worst thing ever done to the U.S. economy? As you are about to find out later in this video, the real devastating impacts are down the road. But what is really problematic about all of this is the damage appears to have been intentionally inflicted, that it wasn't accidental. Now, who would do this and why? When you look at the world through a lens that the globalists are attempting to assume totalitarian control of the world through a great reset, then the lockdowns of the pandemic and the USA's current policies during the Ukraine crisis, they all make perfect sense. The primary purpose is to wreck the strongest economy on the planet, the USA's, and force its currency into default, thus causing a worldwide financial collapse. Once that's accomplished, when the world's people are clamoring for a savior, then the globalist bankers will sweep in saying, "We'll save you. We'll forgive your debt. We'll give you universal basic income. And we'll give it to you in the form of digital currency. All in exchange is give us your assets, ownership of your house, your cars, your furniture, your land, your businesses, everything. Yes, maybe even your children. And this will make you a slave of the state." Very similar to what we have in China right now. But at least, they'll say, you'll survive. These globalists are such nice guys, aren't they? This is the plan that's been ongoing for several decades, but it has become apparent with the pandemic of 2020. And what is the initial step governments took to overcome the pandemic? They acted in lockstep as one throughout the whole world to lock down everything. From a Johns Hopkins study in February 2022, they found that in addition to not stemming the flow of the disease or significantly reducing deaths, in other words, it had no positive effects, lockdowns did the following damage. Quote, "They have contributed to reducing economic activity, raising unemployment, reducing schooling, causing political unrest, contributing to domestic violence, and undermining liberal democracy." End of quote. And that damage, of course, may have been the purpose of the lockdowns. According to the Brookings Institute, the economic harm from COVID restrictions that governments placed on us will be long-lasting. Housing shortages, food shortages, supply chain problems, wealth inequities as the rich get richer, and monopoly formation, a loss of small businesses, and a rapid increase of digitalization. All of these things promote an eventual Great Reset. And, for the most part, the governments of the world placed these restrictions immediately without discussion or debate. The governments of the world acting as one, in lockstep. Why? We believe because they are all in on it. They're all part of the plan. COVID primed the pump, so to speak, but more was needed. And nothing would speed that move up as quickly as the crash of the U.S. system and hyperinflation, much like Germany experienced after World War I. Inflation can be driven by many factors, but energy prices are the main driver. The last time any significant inflation in the USA happened, it followed the Mideast oil embargo in the 1970s. We are watching a repeat. The reason this is so is that all goods are transported using fuel. Nothing drives inflation more than restricting energy, like gas or coal, and driving up the cost of energy. This helps explain a lot of the USA's policies, doesn't it? Especially if they're trying to create inflation. So, if that was the plan, it wasn't surprising that the very first act of a new U.S. president was to shut down the Keystone Pipeline and greatly restrict oil land leases, essentially cutting U.S. domestic oil production off at the knees. The U.S. was the largest oil producer in the world prior to that, and not surprisingly, oil prices immediately began to rise after the drop in production, and with it came inflation. Then, days before the Ukraine invasion, the administration blocked all oil permits on federal land. Let's say that again, only days before the invasion, on February 22nd, the administration took drastic measures to further restrict domestic production. At the same time, they began looking under every stone imaginable internationally to import more oil. This is the most contradictory policy imaginable. The claim that this was done in the name of climate change just doesn't hold water. What is more climate friendly? Finding oil in your own nation under highly regulated, climate-friendly laws and using it here, or finding oil internationally in unrestricted conditions and importing it on ships which use more oil and risk oil spills. Either way, you use the same amount, but the risk is higher if you do it internationally. So, this was not done from the perspective of climate change. No, don't let anyone tell you that. It was done to damage the U.S. economy, pure and simple. Remember, as we discussed before, if you default the USA, the world economic system crashes and you can then do your great reset. The globalists accomplish their goal. It's how they build back better. Build back better. Build back better. See, they're all in lockstep. They all use this same mantra. Then enter the Ukraine crisis, a crisis that seemed to come out of nowhere. Much like the COVID pandemic, Putin asked one thing at the beginning of the crisis, a promise that Ukraine would not enter NATO. Actually, in the early 1990s, NATO promised this same thing under the Clinton administration, so Putin was only really asking that NATO keep a promise they had already made. Yet the globalist handlers controlling the governments of the Western nations like the USA, Germany, France, Britain did not agree. Why? Why did they not agree to what was already promised? Well, to force Russia to invade, of course. Why force a war? First, to disrupt the world economy, and two, to unify the world against a perceived common foe, Putin, both of which are happening now just as planned. Media has been telling us that in order to combat Russia's invasion, the Western governments are undertaking sanctions to punish Russia. In this previous video, we discussed how sanctions not only impact Russia, but also damage Western economies by not allowing Russia to pay its bills. But the oil sanctions the USA placed on Russia are the most interesting of all. If it was an effort by all nations to uniformly boycott Russian oil, it would be very effective and would harm Russia and might even stop the conflict. But in this case, it's only the USA boycotting Russian oil. Even their European allies, who are much closer to Russia and have a lot more to lose from Russian aggression, they're still buying Russian oil. Russia isn't harmed at all. It is only a symbolic act by the USA. In fact, in late February, the president's administration said that they would never sanction Russian oil because that would harm the USA consumers and not Russia. It would drive prices higher and Putin would actually become richer, not poorer. However, they did take this action, which was praised by both Republicans and Democrats. Yes, imagine that, something that harms only the USA, praised by everyone, showing us, as we've said many times in previous videos, both parties are in on it. It is a bipartisan effort to destroy the USA economy, not just Democrats or just Republicans. It is the globalists influencing both parties. Without the support of other nations or increases in USA production, the oil boycott is only a symbolic act. Yet media and government seem to be willing to go along with it because they're both owned by the globalists. They have the globalists' best interest at heart, not those of your nation. This brings us to the most damaging part of the oil boycott, damage to the petrodollar system. In the 1970s, an international agreement was made to trade all oil purchases in US dollars, no matter what country was doing the buying. This has made US dollars valuable, if for no other reason than they are the means of exchange. And more than anything else, it has overinflated the value of the dollar. Now that the US is sanctioning Russian oil, will Russia and China and other countries continue to sell oil for dollars, or Will they finally break from this system and sell it in something else? Maybe the Chinese yuan, Bitcoin, or even euros. There was never a more perfect time for the world to kick the USA to the curb and crash the value of the dollar and maybe the US economy. Will the gas boycott alone crash the economy? Well, that's doubtful. But in combination with the impact of a Russian default on their debt, not being able to pay their bills, and the impact of the COVID lockdowns and restrictions, the economy may be weakened to the extent that one more major event after this one may be the turning point. What could that be? Probably nothing that we expect. COVID was a bolt from the blue, and so was Ukraine. But when that next event does happen, we believe it will have been prearranged and orchestrated by the globalists. Yet it will look like a normal random event, and of course, that is how the media will present it when it happens. Just a random, unfortunate event, like COVID or Ukraine. And we're sure it will happen, because this channel believes a globalist-led world government is coming. It's prophesied in the Bible. It's called Mystery Babylon. It's the government that comes before the beast empire. It's the one the beast eventually destroys, but initially it controls the beast. Revelations chapter 17 and 18 outline this horrible government, and that is what we think is forming right now. So, as Jesus commands us to do, we are watching. And to date, each major event in the last 2 years has fit perfectly with the global plan to create a great reset of the economy and of global governance. Speaking of which, the United Nations has moved up its Agenda 2030 to next year, 2023. Their plan is to have the nations surrender their national sovereignty to a world government. In 23 or 24, maybe 25, a world economic collapse might be just the spark for that to happen. Click right here to keep watching to learn about the details of the new United Nations 2023 plans that will take control of the nations and give it to the one world government, run by global billionaires like Gates and Bezos. Till then, this is Nelson, and I'll see you there.